Greetings and welcome to Converging Streams, Interfaith Fellowship in Our Modern World, a production of the Muncie Interfaith Fellowship. This installment, Toward a Positive Peace, contains an excerpt from a talk at the 2012 Conference on World Affairs in Boulder, Colorado. Please welcome Reverend George Wolfe.
I want to take off on the story that she told about the women who gathered together and came and marched and demanded peace and denied them food and water. This was the thing. This is what nonviolent activism is. And I spent a lot of time trying to explain nonviolence to people because people have the impression that nonviolence is passive. But nonviolence is not passive. It comes from the Sanskrit word ahimsa, and it means action, which is taken with the intent of doing no harm and having reverence for life. But the key there is action. Okay? You can be violent by not acting, by being complacent and allowing injustice to go on. So nonviolence requires action. It is not passive. Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King rejected the terminology, the term passive resistance. Gandhi started with that term, but then he rejected it later because it was interpreting what he meant. So nonviolence is active involvement. And we also have to understand the broader definition of violence that we use in peace studies, and you alluded to that. We have, of course, physical violence, and most people, that's what they think of when they think of violence, physical violence. It's fairly self-explanatory. But there's also psychological violence. And psychological violence is name-calling, intimidation, bullying, threats, and so forth. And we see that going on a lot. And then there is what's called structural violence in peace studies. Structural violence is when you have a structure, like an economic structure, religious structure, political structure, social structure. It's imposed on a population, and it's the type of structure which disenfranchises a certain group of people and oppresses them or discriminates against them. That's the type of, we call that structural violence. And it can be economic in its form, as often, but it also can be educational, denying equal educational opportunities to women, for example, is a form of structural violence. And so when we think of nonviolence and we think of issues related to justice, we need to think in those broader terms. We generally, if we just attack problems on the level of physical violence, we're being very superficial. The roots of those are really much more deeply found in structural violence and psychological violence. Now, of the three in the United States, which do you think is the hardest to deal with? We have laws against physical violence. If I assault you, you can do something about that. You'll get in legal trouble. We do have laws against structural violence in the sense that anti-discrimination laws and so forth. But I can call you all the names I want. I can intimidate you verbally all I want to do, and it's free speech. See? So free speech is something that is a problem. It's not a problem. We should have it. But it calls on the individual to understand how speech can become fall into the category of psychological violence and actually be the root then of greater conflict. Well, you mentioned the term positive peace, which is in the title we have. And in peace studies, we talk about positive peace and negative peace. And these were terms which were developed by Johan Galtung, who is a Norwegian peace researcher, somewhat the father of peace studies. And, of course, negative peace is the absence of conflict, absence of war, but it is not a constructive relationship. The United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War were pretty much in a state of negative peace. Wasn't much cooperation going on. The deterrence was highly negative in the sense we both had nuclear weapons. The deterrence was a negative deterrence. Now that changed somewhat when détente came in, and we had some trade and so forth, and grain trade and so forth. But overall, during the Cold War, that's a perfect example of what negative peace is. Positive peace is when you've built cooperative relationships, is when you have a collaboration going on. And that can be, of course, all these can be between individuals, between organizations, or between countries. If you look at Japan in the United States, there's a great deal of positive peace that has been built over the past many years in our relationship with Japan. So when we move towards positive, we need to understand that peace is not something we should be thinking of as the absence of something, but as something which is added beyond, so that we can have constructive, collaborative relationships going on between cultures, between countries, and so forth. Student exchanges between cultures, a form of positive peace building. Globalization offers a lot of promise with respect to positive peace building if it's done right. If it's done exploitatively, then it can actually hurt the cause. The problem, of course, in many other countries, they don't have the kind of protective labor laws that we have here. And so many of our multinational corporations go into other countries, set up businesses and so forth, and they wind up having their workers work in sweatshops and so forth, and that is counterproductive. Even recently, you heard the story of Apple Computer. It was found that they had very poor working conditions in a factory they had in China. And you would think that you wouldn't expect that of Apple Computer. I mean, we sort of hold Apple a real high in our hierarchy of organizations. But you see how easy it can happen. We have to be very vigilant to that. If we wind up in a state where we're actually exploiting workers, we are going to be hurting the whole process of building positive peace. So we need to set the example in the whole globalization move, which I think is inevitable. We need to set the example and make sure that we are living by example and not perpetuating unhealthy exploitive working conditions in other countries. That's just an example of how we have to be vigilant towards that. Now, I've had some experience, of course, in peace building in a very local way, and I'm a member of this organization called the United Religions Initiative, which has cooperation circles around the world. We have one in Muncie, Indiana, and we get together. We have several religious groups represented in this organization: Native American, Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and Baha'i. And we have events. We try to have events which bring people together in interfaith dialogue and also in interfaith dinners. We have interfaith dinners and programs, bring speakers in and so forth. And we help collectively with a food pantry downtown. This is an effort, a very localized effort of interfaith peace building in Muncie, Indiana. It became very crucial because a number of years ago there was what was called the National Day of Prayer controversy in Muncie. There were some people who said some very negative, unhealthy things about other religious traditions when we tried to have an interfaith National Day of Prayer, which ironically Ronald Reagan instituted when he was president. It's supposed to be on May 4th, I believe it is, or May 7th. So that became a big issue, and it was a huge conflict that was covered in the Chicago Tribune and the Los Angeles Times. I don't know if any of you saw it, but it was years ago. We've come a long way from that, and much of what our cooperation circle did was to write letters to the paper and write articles to clarify a lot of misinterpretations that were being thrown out about other religious traditions. But the remarkable thing that's gone on, we have a Reformed Jewish temple in Muncie, and we have a mosque. And a lady in the Jewish temple got together with a lady in the mosque, and you were talking about the role of women, and they said, hey, let's get together and once a year have a dinner and bring the mosque and the Jewish community together. And it's been remarkable. They've done it. The first 2 years they did it by themselves, and then they invited other groups to join them. And this last one we had it March 6th, I believe it was. And we had Christian, Baha'i, Hindu, Muslim, and Jewish all represented at this interfaith dinner. It was a very beautiful event. Over 125 people came, and articles were in the paper and so forth. And so that's building a structure, you see, and an example of how it's possible for people from diverse cultures, diverse religious traditions can work together. And that idea was instituted by 2 women in the community. I bring this up, though, when I used to teach a class in Introduction to Peace Studies. I have to inject a cautionary note, however, and one is that I always would say to my students, women have these nurturing qualities, or the caregivers, the reasons which you gave, and so forth. And would it be better for them if more of them were in power, or if they were in power, and would we have less war? And of course, the entire class would agree, based on that particular argument. And then I said, has anyone ever heard of the Falklands War? When Falkland Islands was a territory of Great Britain, and Argentina took over the island, and without any negotiation, the British decided to go to war and get those islands back. And they said, oh yeah, they were all born after that, of course, but they knew something about it. And I said, well, who was Prime Minister of England when that happened? And of course, it was Iron Maggie. Yeah. Okay. So that's the cautionary note. And the point I try to make is what we really need to do is awaken the feminine nature within each of us. Whether our outer shell is masculine or feminine, it's the feminine nature within us. It's that caring, nurturing capacity that seeks reconciliation within us. That's really what we need to awaken. And this really brings about the difference between justice and reconciliation. Pope John Paul, I believe it was famous. I don't know which number I have to put after that, but he was famous for saying, if you want peace, work for justice. Okay? But we really need to go beyond justice to reconciliation. See, justice is fairness, but you can be in a conflict and you can work out a just resolution, but you may not be willing to work together after that. You may feel, okay, we got the conflict solved, but I'm still not going to work with you. Reconciliation, and this is really the goal of mediation, is to restore the working relationships, and that requires forgiveness. Justice requires tolerance. Reconciliation requires understanding and forgiveness. Let me just close by reading a short passage from the Tao Te Ching, which is a Chinese scripture, the scripture of Taoism. Taoism, as you may know, merged with Buddhism as Buddhism went into China, but Taoism predates it. This, I think, little passage really summarizes what positive peace is. It says, "There is a saying among soldiers, I dare not make the first move, but would rather play the guest. I dare not advance an inch, but would rather withdraw a foot. This is called marching without appearing to move, rolling up your sleeves without showing your arm, capturing the enemy without attacking, being armed without weapons." Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Converging Streams, Interfaith Fellowship in Our Modern World. Our program is a production of the Muncie Interfaith Fellowship and is supported by our community. We thank you, our listeners and followers, for your support. To connect with Converging Streams, including listening to our entire catalog of past programs, getting our latest new content, and making your own contribution to this program, visit our website, convergingstreams.org. Converging Streams is produced by Tony Piazza and George Wolfe. Thank you for listening and have a pleasant week.